Sale for Rebels of Disclosure 2025, May 12th through the 15th in Grafton, Illinois at the beautiful Pierre Marquette Lodge and Conference Center. Make sure you take advantage of the early bird specials before Black Friday. This will be a 4-day event with 12 speakers covering topics such as ET contact, experiencer testimonies, lost history, secret space programs, time travel, Illuminati, parallel realities, and so much more. Visit journeytotruth.online for more details. Make sure to grab your ticket today before the early bird special ends on Black Friday. We hope to see you there. Tickets are now on sale for Rebels of Disclosure 2025, May 12th through the 15th in Grafton, Illinois at the beautiful Pierre Marquette Lodge and Conference. Tickets are now on sale for Rebels of Disclosure 2025, May 12th through the 15th in Grafton, Illinois at the beautiful Pierre Marquette Lodge and Conference Center. Make sure you take advantage of the early bird specials before Black Friday. This will be a 4-day event with 12 speakers covering topics such as ET contact, experiencer testimonies, lost history, secret space programs, time travel, Illuminati, parallel realities, and so much more. Visit journeytotruth.online for more details. Make sure to grab your ticket today before the early bird special ends on Black Friday. We hope to see you there. So up next, we have Derek and Daniel from Shred the Veil, which is their YouTube channel. Essentially, it's their podcast. And their grandfather was in the shadow government, and he wrote a book called Life with a Cosmos Clearance. And it's for sale on the back table for $25 if you want. They brought a few limited copies, and they'll sign them for you if you'd like. But it's an incredible book. And their grandfather had a Cosmos clearance, above top secret clearance in the military, in the shadow government. And they have been continuing his legacy since he passed on, and they have been uncovering a lot of information about his involvement in the military, in the shadow government, and these secret projects, including the Wingmakers, which we all know and love by now, and secret space programs and things of that nature. So I'm very excited to see what they've uncovered. They've been doing, they're diligent researchers, and they've been doing a lot of hard work to put this together, and we're happy to have them join us. So, oh yeah, I gotta cue this up. So, without further ado, Derek and Daniel.
There's about 38 levels above top secret. The highest is cosmic. That's UFOs, aliens, particleization. No president has ever been cleared for that level. There's only probably about 25 people in the world that know and that are known at that level.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Thank you, guys. That was our overly dramatic introduction to our show. We are Daniel and Derek, also affectionately known as those Wingmaker guys. Yeah, this is our show, Shred the Veil. It's on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is Clear Thought, CLR Thought. And most of our content, though, is actually on Infinite TV, infynit.tv. So today, we are going to talk about this guy right here. He's our grandfather. Yeah. So we're gonna teach you a little bit about his life. First, we're gonna start out with his public life and how everyone else knew him, and then we're going to go to his, I guess, undercover life or off the record. So he was in the United States Air Force from 1947 to 68. Then he went into the National Reconnaissance Office in 69, and not really sure when that ended. He was a disclosure witness at Dr. Greer's 2001 Disclosure Project, and he wrote his book in 2003, Life with a Cosmos Clearance. So he was born in Sugar Land, Texas. He was one of 7 kids. His last name was Morris, but his parents couldn't afford that many children, so they actually gave him up for adoption, and he became Daniel Salter. And I guess they had some hard times growing up in the Great Depression. He told me a story one time. They let all the kids out of school, and they had to work in the cotton fields instead of going to school for several months.
Okay, yeah, I'll just quickly mention who this is. This is our grandfather's grandfather. So since we're talking about him, I thought I'd mention who this is. And he is known as Sheriff High Pockets Bailey from West Texas. He was the sheriff for that town. Again, our grandfather was adopted, so this was his adopted grandfather, but he grew up with him, and he told me a story once when he was maybe between 3 or 5 that he got in trouble. He was acting up, so High Pockets Bailey just grabbed him by the seat of the pants, took him down the road and threw him in the jail cell and said, "This is where you're going to end up if you keep acting up." So that was his recollection of his grandfather, he's told. So.
Yeah.
So our grandfather was in the Korean War. He started his service, as mentioned, in 1947, basically, when all the action was happening. But he was shipped off to the Korean War, and he didn't think he was going to make it. That war was a brutal war. If many might maybe not have heard of it so much, but they don't talk about it a lot. But he didn't think he was going to make it back. He was stationed in Japan. So you'll see on the next slide that this is actually our grandmother, Shizuko Komiya. So we are quarter Japanese. And so they got married, a Shinto wedding, when he was very young. Just for a couple years, they had our mother in 1950, but he didn't think he was going to make it back from the war. So there was another gentleman from the Navy, from the U.S., that really, really liked our grandma, and so he would not leave her alone. Basically wanted to say, "Hey, I want to be with you." So our grandfather agreed, "You can marry our grandma and take my daughter and make sure they're safe, because I don't think I'm going to make it back." So that's what happened. So lo and behold, this is like that movie Pearl Harbor, except it's in the Korean time. But they stole it from us. But so basically, that's what happened. He didn't think he was going to make it back. He found out they went back to the U.S., and he ended up kidnapping our grandma and our mom back from him. Almost got court-martialed for it. So that basically the agreement was he takes our mom, and Shizuko, our grandma, stays with the guy from the Navy. So lo and behold, our mom's here with our granddad in the U.S. in Texas for a while. This is the grandmother that we remember growing up. This is our grandma that we grew up with. So just some old pictures.
Yeah, he remarried, and so she raised my mom here in the States. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Shizuko and him got divorced, and she went back to Japan. Yeah.
So he thought that military record was confusing enough. Well, his personal life was very confusing. And so, and our grandmother in Japan was married 2 other times, well, by this Navy, and then another time, so we have a lot of connections there too. This is the actual records of our mom saying that she was adopted, even though she was with our grandfather. So again, very confusing story, but that's them all together. Interesting to note that our mom and this grandma here both worked at NASA in 1969 when the Apollo missions were happening. For some reason, our grandmother was in the government, and so that was just kind of neat coincidence. And I don't know if our grandfather had something to do with that.
And so I have a lot of stuff that I'm storing from my mother, and it includes a lot of things that I found from my grandfather. And I believe this ring is the first thing that was actually from his grandfather, High Pockets Bailey, who you just saw. Our grandfather told us he was a 33-degree Mason, and I think that's his ring because I found it next to a police chief medal that was dated in the 1920s. And then our mother was actually put into the Order of the Eastern Star, which is like the female version of the Masons, I think. And that's our granddad's mom's book talking about, the different rites and rituals and stuff for that. Our mom remembers being in that when she was young, but she didn't stay in it. And then this is another interesting one I found. It's Freemasonry symbolism from 1912. And I believe that was his grandfather's as well. So just some interesting things we found, and you'll see where that may become relevant later in his story. This is his military record that we requested from the National Archive, showing his enlistment dates from 47 to 68. His Geneva Convention's identification card where they actually got his birthday wrong by a year, so another interesting mistake. But his tours of duty, he was in Japan from 1947 to 1950 when he first got in, a couple years in Korea during the war, and then back in Japan 57 to 58, and then in some time in Germany towards the early 60s. And he did have a top secret cryptographic clearance officially on the record from 1966 to 68. Based on his testimony and what we've learned now from his career, he probably had those clearances much earlier, like almost when he first started, and we'll talk about that. And we believe that this was just kind of the official document that was issued to swear him into secrecy so that, you know, they looked and said, hey, this guy's gonna retire in a couple years, and there's nothing on his record to keep him from talking, so this is kind of how they made that happen, is kind of what we're speculating. This is his announcement of retirement and some of the achievements he had. I won't go through them all for the sake of time, but some different medals he received during his career. When he retired, 1968, he started a flight school in Houston, Texas, and then he moved to Fort Worth, where he was the head of pilot technology for 22 years and a flight instructor at Dallas Mountain View Community College. And in that time, probably late 80s, early 90s is when he started talking about his time in his secret clearances and what he had access to and UFOs and things like that. He was also known for giving lectures on the Urantia book, if you guys are familiar with that material. But we knew him as our grandfather. Yeah, he was Pop-Pop, and that's all we knew.
Yeah, so I do remember later on as a teenager that we would go to Taos to visit him. He moved to Taos eventually once he got divorced for the second time, I guess. But he moved to Taos. It was a great place to kind of go hang out as a kid. He had a lot of interesting people that I remember that were always around in these small circles. That's when he started to really speak out. So we knew something was going on, or I kind of was like, wow, this is really cool. He's talking about, I saw an old VHS tape of Phil Schneider that he was still on the circles, I guess just finished, maybe he just passed away. So our grandfather knew obviously about him then, and we'll see he was good friends with him. But yeah, the one thing that he did mention when we was about this age, about 10, that he recalled his first UFO sighting, and our mom told us to gather around the table, your grandfather has something to say, and he finally revealed all that about the first sighting that you'll hear about, but that was in like 93 or so.
Yeah, and I had been going out to visit him every summer since I was like 6 years old through my teenage years. And he didn't start talking about this stuff again until the 90s, so I was a little older. And I remember him telling me some wild stories that blew my mind about us trying to bomb German UFOs in Antarctica and making holes in the ozone layer. He told me about the Philadelphia experiment. He told me about extraterrestrials coming to this world that didn't have bodies, but they became physical beings so they could interact with us and, you know, take on a form that they could communicate to us with. So I didn't know what to do with that information at the time. I didn't really tell anyone about it because it's kind of crazy, kind of out there. But yeah, it wasn't until he came out with his book and we found out he was part of this disclosure program that really sparked our interest. So this is the beginning of the unofficial record, and this is the beginning of his book as well that we're going to start getting into. And we're going to kind of go through a lot of the content in the book very fast because there's some stuff at the end we really want to get to. So if it seems like we're kind of flying through the slides, it's all in the book. We just really want to make sure we're able to share the stuff at the end of this presentation. But he was a member of the Disclosure Project in 2001. He was one of the 20 witnesses that came forward. He was the only one that actually didn't speak at the press club when it was time to, for everyone to get up and officially talk to Congress. And he just froze up and he kind of started making these weird sounds and they had to take him off stage. And
we learned that from Dan Willis, who's right here.
Yeah, Dan Willis met with him that morning, had coffee with him, and there was a lot of pressure on all these gentlemen for, talking about this stuff because there are consequences that we'll find out my grandfather was very aware of when you tell things that you're not supposed to talk about. So he was very nervous about that. But here's a little introduction from Dr. Greer.
When I got out in 1989, we had...
Dan Salter is a retired Air Force career man, E9, Master Sergeant, who was involved in the extraterrestrial issue for many, many years. He later, after leaving the Air Force, was recruited into the super secret National Reconnaissance Organization, or NRO. during which time he worked specifically on extraterrestrial matters and the retrieval of extraterrestrial vehicles and the management of this subject. He had a cosmic top secret clearance, top secret cosmic compartmentalization, which he states no U.S. president, to his knowledge, has ever held.
Right before the time of the Disclosure Project, he started to have a lot of little mini strokes. So his ability to communicate wasn't the greatest. And in this next clip this is Clifford Stone's testimony. That's our grandfather sitting right behind him there, not looking like he's in the best shape. But you'll notice throughout Clifford's testimony, he does acknowledge some certain aspects of it.
When I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species. You have individuals that look very much like you and myself that could walk among us and you wouldn't even notice the difference, except for some of the things that they might be able to go ahead, even in a dark room, and touch an object and go ahead and identify what color that object might be. They would have a heightened sense of smell, sight, hearing. The situation is that you have various types of what we normally call grays. We didn't call them grays in the military, but you had at least 3 types of the grays. You had some that were much taller than we were. The unique thing that I'd like to point out for the most part is that the entities that we did catalog were in fact humanoid. Now this created a situation where the scientific community was trying to figure out why that would be the case, because you would expect that if life evolved on other planets, that they would take on some type of other being, so to speak, not necessarily look humanoid or be bipedal such as we are. But apparently, we got quite a few of the species out there that are humanoid in appearance, and that creates a question that yet has to be answered by science.
And so the reason we're showing his testimony is that will be relevant later on at the end here. And so as we're going through more about our grandfather, just to note that I mentioned the mini strokes, he continued to have those after the Disclosure Project and up until having his book published. Someone had to help him write it. In 2007, he passed. So during that time, we didn't really know what the disclosure, when it first came out, we weren't even aware that he did it. It wasn't until several years later, and so we never really had a chance to talk to him about the content of his book or any of that, or have him elaborate on a lot of this stuff. So it's kind of been our journey to corroborate a lot of the information over the years and figure out what's really the truth and find more out. So it's kind of our background mission on this. So this was recorded in the 1990s. We found this randomly on the internet from somewhere in Brazil. It was translated into from Spanish. So it's kind of weird how we found it, but we're grateful that we have this, him talking in the 1990s about his first encounter.
Now, my first encounter was when we was running radar missions we thought it was against SAT, penetration mission. That's when we had old gas-powered radars strung all across the United States, the DO line, and so forth. Actually, what we were running missions against, so was UFOs. This was 1950, 51, 53. We was at Warner Robins Air Force, temporary duty. It was moving the most powerful radar that the government had at that time down here. 2 sets, a search and a hype finder. And one day, there was 5 of us on the tower, and I had 7 men. 5 of us was on the tower working, and somebody said, "Look, flying saucers." So we turned around. There's these 3 shining objects sitting out there about a mile, flat on bottom, round on top, luminous, shining. That was in the Project Blue Book. Okay, the astrophysicist in charge of investigating that and debunking all these sightings was H.J. Hynek, which later became a friend of mine. He was a technical advisor on Close Encounters, the 3rd guy, paid by the government. The government has paid every one of the Spielberg movies that he has made. They have guaranteed if you lose any money on this, we will pay your losses. So far, he hasn't lost any money. So we haven't put any money out in the Federal Reserve Fund. There's a new one coming out
pretty soon, 3 or 4 months, the Roswell incident. Now, it's supposed to be the closest to the truth of what happened down there.
But anyway, he did mention they were running radar penetration missions on what they thought was against Strategic Air Command SAC, but it was really, they had set that up, he found out later, to disturb the UFOs that were there. And he did mention he later became friends with Heineke, who was in charge of Project Blue Book, and we'll go into more of that too.
When I was in the Air Force in 1950, I was stationed with Warner Robins Air Force Base. We were there on a secret mission. We were from the Eglin Air Force Base, Air Proving Ground from Maine, in Florida. I don't know if you know it, but Eglin Air Force Base has the largest climatic hangar in the world. Anything that comes out new for the military is tested there. They can simulate any kind of conditions in the desert, the Arctic, North Pole, South Pole, whatever. Drop the temperature, lower the temperature, raise the temperature, blizzard conditions can be simulated in that hangar. I was working on a top secret project that World War II was called identification, friend or foe. Later on, it come up to security identification feature. Now it's a Mode 6 transponder that is in every aircraft that flies, the skies in the United States and most of the world. This genius that invented this thing worked for 12 years. I worked with him for about 3 years. And in working with him, when we was running the acceptance test for the Air Force on the equipment he was inventing for the Air Force, he would tell me other projects that he was working on. Well, sometimes I'd ask him questions. Well, you don't even need to know. I still tell you that. That's top secret. But after a while, he would start telling me things, and I guess he didn't really trust me. And then he began to tell me about other projects that the Air Force was working on. The Air Force knew that after we'd worked together for a couple of years, that he had told me this. They figured it. So they called me in and said, has he ever mentioned this and this to you? I said, yes. And they said, well, how would you like to work on some of the projects? I said, okay. So, and that started a series of examinations into every feature of my life, my history, and everything else, by medical doctors, psychiatrists, and theologians and professors of psychiatry and so forth. So I guess I was accepted along with a few other guys. We started working on some projects. Mainly the one I was on was the development, the capture of, the investigation of anti-gravity electromagnetic propulsion systems. Most of you know that as UFOs, but they're not unidentified. They've been identified for over 50 years. And the beings that was on them.
That was him working with Benoit Mandelbrot and getting privy to some of the programs, getting into the Black Ops stuff. And here's another one explaining his acceleration into the various clearances.
Well, I was a Conrad courier that carried the war codes that are sent out by the president. If you ever watch the president, there's a warrant officer by his side all the time. He has the launch codes to all the nuclear vehicles. And it's passed down through the Air Force. 2 men are always in control of those codes in your arm, and you're sworn to shoot the other one if he's going to compromise the code. So I had a top cryptographic top secret clearance. So I go in the center and I watch all these messages come in of all incidents where these UFOs were sighted. And I got to learn, hey, there's a lot of this going on. And then other people that had the same type of clearance, I began to discuss, risk with them. And about that time when I learned this is when the Air Force decided he knows more than he should know. So we either take care of him or we bring him in on the project. That's when they offered me the opportunity to go to work on secret projects, of course, anti-gravity electromagnetic field.
Yeah, he's basically talking about how he further got clearances working with the cryptographic stuff.
So yeah, then he does mention eventually getting put into Project Blue Book. He mentions in the book other projects like Project Grudge, Sign, and he mentions Bear, and I've never heard of Bear. I don't know what that is, but maybe one of you guys have heard about it. So the Men in Black, he talks about being a part of the initial team right here. This is going to probably be the last video, and then we'll speed things up. But he does mention being a part of that initial team, and this was back in the early days when the Men in Black were actually humans, because we know over time they turned into something else apparently. But the initial team would go and interrogate, and he was doing this for the military personnel and would say, what did you see? You didn't see what you think you saw. It was swamp gas. It was something else. If that didn't work, a second team would come in and make all the threats to hit them and the family. A third team would come in if that didn't work, and they would just get rid of them. And that's some of the names of the terms, the 00 boys, the Black and Nut assassins. That's terms for the people that got rid of them.
So for years, my job was, like anything was as a civilian, mine was as a military investigator, to debunk anybody that had any kind of incident or sighting, so on and so forth. My job was to go see them, convince them this did not happen, so on and so forth. If I couldn't do that, members of my team couldn't do that, then we turned it over to other people. Their job was to coerce, threaten, or eliminate people that they could not control.
Okay, so we'll go a little bit quicker now through some of this. This is all in the book, remember, so if you want more information, go back and see that. But he mentions Bill Cooper specifically because they actually exchanged information, and what Bill Cooper did for the Naval Intelligence, our grandfather was doing for the Air Force. And it was based on UFOs and cover-up. So Bill Cooper, and also if you didn't see that last part, Langley was where all the cryptographic information was coming through at one point. All intelligence information went through Langley. So he was at Langley at the time that was happening. So that's why he also had clearance to just about everything with what his clearance was. But Bill Cooper obviously passed away. I really encourage you to read Behold a Pale Horse. I binge watched all Hour of the Time radio show that he had for decades. And just the way he passed away is obviously they tried to get rid of him. Look at his autopsy just proves that, but he was killed shortly after saying about Osama bin Laden being the scapegoat for 9/11.
So now we'll introduce the NRO here, National Reconnaissance Office.
Eisenhower wanted somebody to be in charge. He tried the CIA director, and it didn't work. CIA was working primarily for itself. Most of the intelligence directors of the services were working for themselves. So he said, I want it to be independent. I want it to be civilian. I want it to be some of our top scientists. And so it was organized under the name, the NRO. You couldn't mention NRO.
NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. Basically run by the Air Force. The Reconnaissance Office, from my understanding of people that I've had contacts with since I retired, has taken on a lot more responsibility, particularly towards UFO and extraterrestrial activities. You could say that they picked up where Blue Book dropped off.
So that was footage from the disclosure testimony. You can see he's a little older. He's already had some mini strokes, so he's a little slower, but at least you can hear it better. But yeah, they couldn't mention the NRO until the mid-90s. It was made a public organization. And this is our grandfather, it's Derek on his graduation, but he wore around this CIA hat with his Air Force wings pinned to it. He's talking a little bit about the CIA. A lot was going on in 1947. Operation High Jump had just happened earlier that year, then Roswell crash, and then they established the CIA and the US Air Force on the same day. Operation Paperclip was in full effect, and they just started their first plans on underground bases in New Mexico and Colorado.
Yeah, and he wore hats like that. He didn't really explain it. He was just like, oh, I didn't know if he was trying to recruit me to the CIA or what, but he would just wear stuff like that and not really explain that he was a part of a lot of this. But this is a very important document he puts in the book. This is basically when MenJ 12 was created, just 6 days after all of those other organizations were created in 1947. So this is the memo or letter to Forrestal, Secretary Forrestal from the President Truman, saying that everything regarding this matter is considered Operation Majestic 12, and only reports to the President, Dr. Vannevar Bush, and the Director of the CIA.
And this is about clearances.
There's about 38 levels above top secret. The highest is cosmic. That's, okay, I'll tell you right now, that's UFOs, aliens, and particleization. Now, like you heard a while ago, there's only probably about 25 people in the world that know things that are known at that level. No president has had that level, has ever been cleared for that level. Eisenhower was the closest.
Start here, there's top secret way down here, and you go through the crypto clearances, and then Cosmos, Astral, Stellar, Ultra, Luna, Cosmic, Majestic. So Dr. Greer introduced him as Cosmic Clearance. He just said Cosmic there. His book says Cosmos, so there's some discrepancy, confusion there, but we do know that he did have access to Majestic documents and that information. So I think he had Cosmic.
Yeah, most likely Cosmic is where he was, but maybe the book title sounded better with Cosmos, I don't know. But and again, his whole life was kind of misleading people as what he really was involved with. So this is important. This is a chart that he used that stamp of authenticity, which we'll get to, but it does say that, hey, this is a real document, and he saw this back when he was, in service in the 50s. It was made in 1954. So we're going to find out that maybe he was part of actually making some of this material, and because of dealing with the crafts and everything else. So that's an important piece of information. And now Forrestal is also a very critical part of this because, as you guys know, I mean, you don't really hear about him much, but he was basically suicided and taken out because he was the only one of MJ-12 that wanted to speak out and tell the public what's happening. So
yeah, we also, my grandfather also discussed this, and someone put this online again, and it sounds, they messed up his voice, so, but here it is.
Secretary of Defense Forrestal was the first real powerful known person that was eliminated because he was going to release the information. And nobody has ever paid for that crime. That crime has never been really thoroughly investigated by forces to see what happened to him. But most people know that he was thrown out the window of the hospital, and he wasn't killed by being thrown out the window, but he never got up alive.
And so he was Dan Salter was part of the Interplanetary Phenomenon Scientific and Technical Counterintelligence Unit. And it's a mouthful, but that was established after the famous Battle of Los Angeles in 1942. And they were the ones that investigated the Roswell incident and pretty much handled the initial UFO crashes. And so he had this stamp right here in the headquarters of the Interplanetary Phenomenon Scientific and Technical and Counterintelligence Unit. And
you still have the stamp somewhere, but we couldn't get it.
I found it in the storage, the actual physical ink stamp that he would stamp his documents with. And from what we could tell, he was he used a lot of discretion in what he shared in his book and what he told to the public for his own safety. But when he put this stamp on a document, it was kind of his symbol of authenticity that, this is worth looking into, or there's a lot of credibility to this.
Somehow he even got it on his on the vehicles he drove around with, so he has a license plate as well.
Yeah. And we have a little story on this license plate. A text message from our dad just this year. My dad's a civil engineer. He had a project at the Norfolk Naval Station in Virginia, and our grandfather's van, he was driving our grandfather's van because it was a wedding present for him. And I'll read this. He said, anyway, I got to the guardhouse expecting to spend 10 or 15 minutes describing who I was and where I was going, but lo and behold, they waved me right through. I looked at them quizzically like, are you sure? This was very baffling, as others had told me it would take an act of God just to get into this place. So on the way out, I asked the guy at the guardhouse, how come they waved me right through? He said it was a license plate. I can't remember what symbol it had on it, but it was all I needed to get into the government facility. He said the weird thing about it is that they had no idea who I was. They never stopped me or checked my credentials. I'm guessing it would have been the same if there were 2 or 3 passengers or 15 clowns. So it was pretty crazy. And so our grandfather was the only person in the Disclosure Project to mention the ACIO.
If you're on that level, there's an organization worldwide called ACIO. That's Alien Contact Intelligence Organization. If you pay your dues and you follow the rules, you can benefit. Your government is allowed to benefit from that organization's information.
So again, all this, and we'll get into the ACIO a lot more later, but all this information on his Disclosure Project journey was in his book, and this is the next content of the book. The next chapters were occult influences in the early UFO technology with the Nazis, and he mentions a lot about the secret societies, the Brotherhood of the Black Sun, and the early UFOs from the Germans actually had these esoteric symbols from historic groups and secret societies. Yeah, so we're going to kind of speed through these parts because it's in the book. He talks about Hitler's master Aryan race and the expeditions they went to. They're actually looking for Shambhala, Gartha, things like that. And he had his own eugenics program. He said, according to the reports I have seen from the UK spy networks, MI5, MI6, French Underground, and the the OSS, the two secret societies were communicating with distant worlds in 1917 Vienna. They channeled all the UFO technology. They included a couple, Dr. Schumann and Schauberger were the two Nazi scientists that helped to develop a lot of the technology. And our grandfather said that Victor Schauberger actually lived in Taos, and he shared his ideas of nature with the members of Taos Pueblo. He secretly lurked in Los Alamos, and he was disappointed that his implosion science that was developed was used for nuclear weapons. So we think that maybe he came over as part of Paperclip and the reason why he was even in the United States. But from what I understand, Victor Schauberger had to share his information with the Nazis against his will. He goes further into the secret societies and the technology, the New World Order agenda. Really, the main motives were depopulation, getting weapons into space, and extraterrestrial threats like a false flag invasion. He said the military-industrial complex is like the tentacles of an octopus, much further reaching than we can imagine. He goes a lot into the details of the craft. He talks about back in 1931, 1932, they recovered craft from Brazil and brought it over.
My mission, you might say, is to tell people what I know about anti-gravity electromagnetic propulsion systems. I was in the Air Force for 21 years, and that's where I run into electromagnetic propulsion systems. You think that's something new? The Germans had electromagnetic propulsion systems during World War II. They knew they existed in 1932 because they had some. And they had the people that had built, and they learned from them how to build electromagnetic propulsion systems. And recovered 2 ships in Brazil with crews aboard, took them to Germany, and their science started working on them right away.
Yeah, it's going more into the various different craft that they had.
They went all the way back to Nebuchadnezzar. Got the Maltese cross with a circle in the middle. That's the symbol of the black sun. When they started building their anti-grav electromagnetic propulsion system, that symbol was on early ones they built, the Honeydew 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, they used to fly through the formations during World War II, and we'd see them as light because the sun was shining off of them. So
He talks about basically those were the Foo Fighters that would stop the engines of the Air Force planes in World War II. He said by 1939, they had craft that could hold 4 passengers and had separate storage compartments. In 1941, they had a supply ship, the Atlantis, that where other smaller craft could park there. 1942, they had a mothership, Andromeda, that could travel off planet and carry at least 7 different craft inside. And anti-gravity wasn't the only phenomenon that the SS was experimenting with. They did mind control, and a lot of that ended up in the hands of the CIA from what they figured out. And then he touches on what was going on in the US in the 30s and 40s with particleization, invisibility, and teleportation. Then he talks about the establishment of the OSS, the first US spy network, and then Project Paperclip, bringing over 30 anti-gravity systems. He talks about the Nazis may have had ancient underground tunnels to escape, and then going down to Antarctica. Operation High Jump was an attempt for us to recover the German technology that had gone down there. And he talks about more into the secret societies, the Brotherhood lodges, and basically the esoteric knowledge that they had. The book is full of all kinds of details, UFO history, Lemuria, Atlantis, Here's a note, he did quote that his grandfather was a 33-degree Mason and his father was a Mason. I eventually recognized the secret brotherhood and the secret governments were in partnership, talking about the battle of the masculine and the feminine, how the feminine has been suppressed, and we need to find balance there. And he said there's an opposition force. There's this true white brotherhood that exists on this planet and in other universes, guiding force to uphold cosmic law to benefit all of humanity. And he said global awareness can prevent escalation of World War III by choosing truth over consequences. And that was actually the potential name of his book, was going to be Truth or Consequences. He talks about the Russians. The Russians also received technology from the Germans. He actually met with one of the Russian guys that was high up in the government, and they had pictures of cylindrical shaped craft that were split into two different pieces taken from a space station that they had.
All right, this is just George Adamski, a whole nother section. Lord Desmond Leslie was nephew of Churchill, and so he was good friends with Adamski. So apparently our granddad thought that this was story checked out about Adamski. Some people think he's a fake or phony, but this is Leslie's account, his letter, and his friendship, and getting interested in UFOs, the Vimananas of the Mahabharata, studying that, the Brahma weapon, like the nuclear weapons, and even holographic weapons he talks about, which is interesting. Then he talks even about Adamski didn't take him up into the spaceships with the spacemen, and what he saw was fireflies, which were the other aircrafts, and that's exactly what John Glenn said in '62. So this was 10 years prior to that. And then he even mentioned 3 asteroid belts when we didn't discover all 3 of them yet. So that's interesting. He validated more about the Pope's medal. Desmond Leslie, he remembered a story about an alien on the trains, basically, that Adamski was talking with, and that whole account. And then the belly button story about him not having a belly button, and he had an incised starburst, like so deep in where his belly button should be, or his navel should be. And when asked, who are you, George? He said, I cannot remember anything before I was 4. My parents told me that one day a man peered and took me away. When I returned, I was a different child. We're going to hear about that in the next talk, I think, by Jerry Wills. So how that's probably really happens. This is just a summary of a grandfather, again, about Adamski, how he was a very special guy. He had an ordinance passed to get anywhere in the government, in the Pentagon. He had kept a lot of secrets between both the government secrets and the alien secrets, and he knew he was like I don't know how you call it, but he was locked tight as far as what he revealed to the other. And he was buried next to JFK, 20-some feet away. So he must have been important for not being a U.S. citizen buried next to JFK, or they thought so anyway. So lenticular vehicles, this is one other craft he talks about. They can actually cloak themselves with clouds. That's why you see lenticular clouds, and if you just get the temperature close to the dew point, you can do that. He describes that in the book. Then this is a summary, kind of like going from the reverse engineered UFOs, what the technology was, the circular, spinny lights. That was like the Model T of the UFOs. Then you get into the motherships and cigar-shaped craft with the electromagnetic propulsion, but could do warp drive up to like warp 4, apparently, from what he was trying to describe. So there's 17 or 18 different types of ET craft that vary in shape, mass, and propulsion system that the military were aware of. And this is the last thing that is kind of interesting to.
So we have robotic, almost like a Mr. Dana, okay, that our government uses. You know that. You go into a place, somebody's holed up or in war, you want to don't want to lose any more lives, you just send one of these robots in. They fly the airplanes like the Pumpkin Seed, the latest black project. It goes 18 times the speed of sound. There's nobody aboard that. There's a robot flying, a robotic that we have built. Nobody can stand the G-forces because that is not an anti-gravity vehicle. Okay? Now, if you have an anti-gravity vehicle, you have no G factor when you're pulling G's, okay? But that airplane, the SR-75 and the Roar, they are not anti-magnetic driven vehicle. The Black Manta is. It's a triangular shaped vehicle, and it has electromagnetic anti-gravity engines. It flies those out of Kirtland, fly them out of Sector 51, and out of Secret Base in Puerto Rico, and out of a joint use base with Mexico and the United States and the aliens out of Sonora. down just opposite the Baja Peninsula.
So that's what he knew about that, and he wrote it more in the book describing the black manta, what that is. The U.S. has these immense black triangle-shaped craft of many different sizes, but we've seen that, he's claiming that the Phoenix Lights was a demonstration in Arizona. Gulf Breeze, Florida was also a demonstration of that technology, and we were just proving to the Allies that they had nothing to fear against a war with Iraq or anybody else, or North Korea. So that's interesting to note. And then he did say this. He talked about this. He's the only one to mention this, but it's the development of conscious contact citizenry department. Now, we hear about David Grush in the NRO. Well, if our grandfather talked about this, I don't think David Grush would be around right now. But he says the NRO agenda to weaponize space against a threat from outer space. It's a false flag, basically back-engineered ET craft that they're using to do this. What is the extraterrestrial agenda within our own government? This mock demonstration of military technology, the Black Manta, which is actually back-engineered ET tech, is setting the stage for weaponizing space against a threat from outer space. The campaign to do this within the public arena was started and implemented by the NRO with this development of conscious contact citizenry department. So just little quotes that he said. This is not spoken of at the Disclosure Project. Very few people know about it. They have been developing it for a long time, and the governments of the world are watching and waiting and watching. So, do you want to do this?
And this is from the book as well. This is basically a map of what the military-industrial complex looked like at his time. It includes the NRO, Magi, defense contractors, the Rockefellers, NORAD, CIA, even the media, Star Wars City and headquarters in Colorado Springs.
Okay, this is just a couple testimony. Again, more about weaponizing space and what the UFOs were doing. The ETs were basically telling us, don't do this. So every time they put out a missile, they would knock it down, they would deactivate it, make it inoperable. So many testimonies about that. One time, 16 nuclear missiles simultaneously became inoperable, according to Robert Salas. So that's pretty amazing. Can't be a coincidence. There's one that flew into the picture. This guy's taking photographs, that's his job, of the warheads flying out. One UFO flew in, shot it, a beam of light at it, shot back out of frame at 11,000 to 14,000 miles per hour, and caught in frame doing that, and just in and out. Talk about bogeys and stuff like that in other testimonies. So this is another interesting thing, of course, from Disclosure Project with Kara Rosin, and she kind of quickly goes through that. I don't think we need to play the video, but she explains the last card, the final card that von Braun always said on his deathbed was the alien card. That's going to be the final card they try to play, an alien threat to, after all the other forms of terrorism they do and everything else. So I think we're kind of at that stage right now. I'm not going to go through the Phil Snyder stuff. He was good friends with Phil Snyder. He said he paid for it by talking. He paid for it with his life. He's a friend I sorely miss. So just a lot of good material from what he talked about. His information. He had a Dulce fight. There was one of probably a couple that we know now that Laura talked about the others, but he was helping to construct these. He found aliens as he was down there. They shot him. He had cobalt radiation from it, so he had cancer, and that's why he was willing to talk so much, because he knew he was going to die. Unlike a grandfather, he said that's the only difference between him and Phil Snyder. Like, he didn't care that he was going to die because he knew he was. So he spoke out until the end. God bless him for doing that and getting this out, but those were all the bases listed, just a few of the bases listed. He said there was 129 around 1989 when he was having this talk. And then they were very disillusioned by this bodies coming back with drugs and money, desecrating the GIs from Vietnam. That's also very sad, but true. Then we have these documents were actually, I found in this my grandfather's collection, just like a forum of back and forth. And this Steve Wingate guy apparently maybe was working with our grandfather to get information out, but he had a whole story about the Dulce base and underground bases. The reptilians that were there maybe were native to the world, Earth, not really from outer space either. So, there was a lot of more information, confirming information about the Greys and the caste system, the working class with the Draco, what the Draco looked like, the tunnels, and then into 33rd degree Mason stuff, which is interesting because they were saying that they're going to use like the alternate 3 scenario, but also underground just to, wait for the destruction of the New World Order to do what they have to do, and the ones that are higher up would basically be okay. But they talk about the factions between the left and the right, all the stuff we see playing out right now. He's describing that pretty much in detail, where that came from, bases on Moon and Mars. This is interesting because this is kind of corroborating that he says, regarding Salter and Steve Wingate's document 97, given to me at Unity Church. So this is just to kind of clarify things that were talked about by our grandfather and this guy, Steve Wingate. And he says, you know, the reptilians are still here, at least at that time in 97, but there are plans to, you know, take control or whatever. But he says they will not be brought to fruition for the simple reason that the forces of light are dedicated to seeing that God's divine plan is fulfilled on earth. This will not take place overnight, so be prepared, complete reunification with your very own cosmic self to become a powerful source of the light, or for the light. All light workers now awakening the call still have much personal work to do before they can make maximum service, be of maximum service of our great God I am, so be it, think love, speak love, become love. And I think that message still makes a lot of sense right now. So.
All right. So the last chapter of his book was about the Waymakers, and this is why we talk about the Waymakers in the ACIO. He was the only one from the Disclosure Project to mention ACIO, as I mentioned. In the book here, he has an ACIO document, and it talks about the Labyrinth group, which is a high-level group, and this individual 15, who was level 15 up there, and we'll talk more about him. But he claims that he heard of the Wingmakers and all of this from an undisclosed source at NASA while investigating other UFO incidents, and he actually said that he saw 15, this ACIO individual at NASA in the 80s. And so Peter and Jessica from the ACIO have mentioned that 15 can show up as a male or female. He's apparently not human. So the ACIO, you guys might be familiar. Peter the Insider, he's a 12th Division director, and Jessica is with the 6th Division. It was set up in the 1950s. Basically, they were. If you ask them, though, that it's been around for thousands of years. But it started out as a couple different groups. They had Consortium A, who oversaw ET interfacing with exopolitics involved and how it affects humans. You know, this basically meant the humans trying to see if the ETs were a threat, and the ETs determining if we were a threat. And then Consortium B that developed and did all the reverse engineering and all the technology, including UFOs, blank slate technology, the SSP protocols, and things like that.
This is where we go down the rabbit hole. Are you ready for that? Because here we go. But you guys, who sort of the Wingmakers? Let's hear them. See them. Okay, so I don't have to go through it. We can skip it. I'm just kidding. All right, I'll talk a little bit about it. So just briefly, this is from the original website, but there's another website that was made much later on. So our grandfather obviously thought this was important. It's the last chapter. He actually had a magazine that he subscribed to called Nexus, and it had this Wingmakers material in it. He stamped it. He's stamping things that he says the truth, that are of the truth. But there's a document, the Wingmakers site and the story is based around a document from the ACIO within the Labyrinth group, the higher secretive level. And it says, after the discovery, this director of special projects for ACIO sent a classified document to the Labyrinth group, and it was formed by 15 in 1963. And 15 was the crazy, weird person. We can't tell if it's a person, a human, who knows. So it's an ultra top secret ET connections to a group with ET connections and blank slate technology, which we'll briefly mention. But this is the best way to summarize it. Just notice on the sides, these are the actual paintings in the chambers that I'm about to describe. So there are 23 chambers, and there's actual artwork, and we've described that in our, we've gone over that with Peter the Insider, and describes each one and what they found. So supposedly the Wingmakers are a future aspect of the human race from 750 years in our future. They left a time capsule for us to discover, dating back to about 800, the 800s, in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. They named it Ancient Arrow Site. It eventually was taken over by the ACIO, 23 chambers with paintings and artifacts. There was also optical disc found with all of the information, 23 segments that were needed to be decoded, but only the first was, at that time, decoded with hieroglyphs and petroglyphs symbols, which added up to 8,000 pages of text. The Wingmakers strategically placed 7 time capsules on the planet to be, for the purpose of culture bearers. For them, they're the culture bearers, bringing seeds of language, art, philosophy, scientific reasoning, spiritual understanding to the human race. Based on the ACIO 11th Group memo, they precisely predicted that all 7 would be discovered by 2023. And I have that full document, and I just found that out, and and we talked about that last year too. They claim to have seeded the concept of the internet, and by 2023, the internet will be the focal point of this new global culture, and it will become the gateway to a connected intergalactic digital nervous system. This is the diagram of what those chambers look like. There's a side view, but getting down to that, how it was discovered is a whole neat story. You should really check out the original website to know. And those are the sites, also Peru, South America, China, South Central Australia, Finland, Africa, and Antarctica. This is just a cool map to describe the NSA and the US government at one level, and then behind the other unacknowledged level, you've got the military-industrial complex and special projects, and then you've got ACIO under that next level too. And then on the very highest level is Labyrinth Group, which is ACIO Division 12 and higher. So that's kind of summarizing that. He talks about blank slate. Blank slate technology is basically the time travel, what they call freedom key. And it also has to do with mind wiping. I think that whole 20 and back thing, the BST technology is what they can do to mind wipe you, and that's kind of where that comes from. Our grandfather says that humans are moving now from the third dimension, where there are 5 senses, to the fourth and fifth dimensions, where there are up to 8 senses. It's either 7 or 8. But I think when he's talking about, is just my understanding would be our ability to not just telepathic, but astral travel, bilocate. Even time travel at the end of it. That was just a cool note. This is an ad for, if you want to learn the mystery schools, this was an ad in that magazine basically promoting to go learn, want to be within the order, whether it's good or bad, who knows, but that's how they used to try to recruit people, is through a magazine. And our grandfather stamped it saying that was real. And so this is the newer side of the Wingmakers. I won't go into details, but there's a lot of terms. The sovereign integral is like the fractal part of us individually. And I think about the holographic universe and that we are all one with the creator, but the sovereign integral is our individual aspect of that. The grand portal is like the scientific discovery of the human soul, and that's kind of what this whole site's about, trying to get to that point. I won't go through the rest. These are other terms we don't have to go through. Our grandfather did teach the Rancher book. That's an actual flyer of him teaching that, so that was kind of cool. And it links up to the Lyricus teachings, which is sort of this here on the left, talking about the central race. And this is all the Wingmakers' philosophy, and that ties pretty well with the central race of the central universe of Urantia and the 7 universes. We're in the 7th. There's a bunch of hierarchies and whatnot to talk about. Go see, check it out if you want. But now, here we go.
So this is the part we were kind of excited before, and this is why we kind of rushed through a lot of the book material. But there's some new information that we recently discovered this past year, and we kind of wanted to present it to you here. I'll let Derek take this first one, though.
This was just a cool document I found just before coming here. And if you know who Ryan and Bob Wood are, they're basically the leading experts on trying to see if the MJ12 documents are real or not. Well, apparently, our grandfather was talking with them and giving him his take on the information that he had to say, verifying is it real or not real. So that was kind of cool to see. He was in discussions with them. Now, yeah, go ahead, do this.
So we have various information that we've received from several different sources, from the ACIO, from Peter the Insider, through the Secret Space program with Will Nutter, channeled information that actually channeled our grandfather, and some remote viewing, including information from Tony. So all of the information that we've received from these sources is all, you'll see some different things there, and it's different from what our grandfather presented through his book and what he was, didn't disclose to the public. So right now we're not saying any of this is true or not true. We're just kind of presenting it here for what it is. It also includes some involvement of Derek and myself in some of these programs, potentially, which we don't have any memories of. So we're not going to dismiss it, but we're not going to say it's true either. So the first one was with the ACIO, with Peter. We had some extensive phone calls with him and discussions about him looking into his files and his records in the database about our grandfather.
Yeah, I'll just briefly go through what it says. So they claim that Daniel Salter was 8th Division of ACIO, and that was security level 32 clearance. He was working with a team. Peter didn't say outright that it was Majestic 12, but Jessica was like, so that sounds like Majestic 12. Is that what it is? And Peter's like, well, you said it, not me. So that's how he always talks, a lot of cryptid stuff. He's approached by the ACIO like Peter was apparently, but it was in the Vietnam time, or in Vietnam, whether it was during the war or not. Maybe that had to do with time travel aspects of things. We don't really know. He did not, they say he did not have direct contact with ETs except one time with an Emerther Council of Five, which the ACIO covers as one of the good ones. Did not directly deal with crash retrievals, but he was MIB Men in Black, so that was confirmed. He dealt with some experience with specific energetic reactors sometime in the 80s, but back then that was a good thing. I'm not sure any more than that. Then that this DCCCD was maybe tied to another reality. That's why we can't find any other information on it, according to Peter. And as Peter kept going through the material, or trying to look on the database, there were these glitches, things would just kind of not really work, freeze up. So that was kind of telling us that it was either being compromised information or stuff he wasn't supposed to share, or he was just afraid to really say more, or something like that. So apparently we are also involved in some programs. And this has not been told to any, I think Jessica and Peter mentioned it maybe a couple times offhand, but nobody's really talked about this. But Peter calls it SWAN, syndrome without a name or subject without a name. It's tied to Monarch, connected or an offshoot of Monarch, and Peter's not surprised by that. SWAN deals mainly with hybridization, teleportation, time travel, alternate realities. Involved in the 80s, we were involved in the 80s, but they were really manipulating timelines then, and it's not clear exactly, but through the 80s. Monarch exists through all timelines and can be tracked, but SWAN, they can come and go, disappear from the timelines as quick as they appear. So that's why they're very secretive, and maybe also why we don't know what our memories are of that. There's also possible ongoing missions, and supposedly maybe we've gone to the future time of 2150. Peter was actually saying he remembered my brother, and he's like, why can't you remember? You were there with me, and all this stuff. So that's interesting. It's like a cyborg reality with future AI, and that's a computer game called Cyberpunk, if you want to look it up and see what that looks like. So anyway, all these time jumps, they can try to maybe come in and mind wipe us or do something, but for whatever reason, we don't have any recall outright without any regression, which we might try to do soon. This is just interesting. This is my pictures I've taken as we started talking about this stuff. I took a jog near my house and happened to see this Monarch symbol, but it was like shortly after I was just talking about it. This is a weird one because you see the swan symbol, and that's really well known for this jewelry store. But I was in Germany, and I was just happened to be walking down at night with a coworker, walking down a dark alley, and literally there's nothing else there. All I just see is these bright lights of this store, and I'm like, that's really odd. Why is it there? And just a few days before that, I was actually meeting with Jessica because she happened to be in Europe. I met with her, and we were just talking about this. So I was like, that's too weird. So anyway.
So, and this is from Will Nutter, also you might know him as Johann Fritz from the Secret Space Program. Will was able to access a database through his alter, Johann Fritz, to get this information. And so he said Johann Fritz, his alter, is currently on the flagship of the Alliance, so he has access to like full database information. So we had a few different conversations with him, a little bit of back and forth. But he says that Daniel Salter, so it's a little different. He said Daniel Salter was screened as a child, and abductions started happening between ages of 1 and 5. At age 8, he was killboxed and fractured, if you've heard of that term through the Secret Space Program, when they try to break your mind. It took 14 attempts to break him. It predated the standard protocols for screening, testing, and fracturing. He is the predecessor to Gen Zero Super Soldier Program, and from this he had PTSD in his teens. He did, after that, he had Super Soldier 1 and 2 training and ET interface training. His involvement with the ACIO began as a teenager. He wrote many initial documents for the ACIO on how to do interfacing, which became the bedrock of what we see today in the programs for ET and human communication. Not sure what that bullet was supposed to say, but they confirmed he had Masonic connections. He was considered a Jason, which was starting in the 1950s, but basically he had Magi clearance, which is above cosmic, and there was only 15 of them in the U.S. at any one time, considered the top clearance in the U.S. military and the military-industrial complex, and he basically had that for the rest of his life. He did see the first cloning technology that came to the U.S. from Japan after World War II. It was used in the U.S. within the ACIO, and it was farmed out to the Germans in Antarctica. He took on 2 alternate identities, and this was prior to the cloning technologies arriving. And it was really unclear. He couldn't tell, based on the different signatures that he was looking in the database, if he was actually these were alters, like fractured personalities, or if these were just personas that he took on, like an intelligence operative would. The two identities were Benjamin Stevenson and Michael Moore. The first one, Benjamin Stevenson, was one of the 15 with the Jason clearance for Magi clearance. He never achieved super soldier status after they tried to experiment him quite a bit. He was eventually given an out, either suicided or wiped. And the other one, Michael Moore, was heavily trained in the ACIO with a group of agents in Dulce, New Mexico, and he was appointed as the ET contact for the human faction there, became an agent in the field after that, and worked with ETs on technology development. And then he talked to us about our involvement. He said we were part of Generation 6 of the Super Soldier program. There was childhood screening and testing similar to our grandfather. He said that I was put on psychological hold at age 15 because of some event that happened. And then I was eventually picked up as an agent at 21. And then I was trained in Gen 2 of the IBIS program, which is the one that Max Spears had gone through when he was Gen 1. Derek's training stopped when he was at age 17 after completing level 2 Super Soldier program. And he was also picked up at 21. He said that we both had several alters and he named them for us and went through the whole thing. He said the reasons we got involved with for genetic and karmic components around the SSP involvement with our grandfather. He said that our strongest soul ancestry signature was Lyrian, and that we're called in to support the preservation of humanity. That was one thing I was like, I found this very disturbing to hear all this information. And so, we're talking about, when your soul incarnates, you have a plan and you agree to do certain things in your life, and usually it's for the benefit of humanity, whether it looks like it or not, I guess. And Daniel Salter's strongest soul ancestry signature was Arcturian. And we got a couple, those notes weren't supposed to be there, but.
Essentially, his job was containment, cleanup, and then concealment. We call the 3 C's, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of his job was, and that particular aspect is what became Division 6 in ACIO, by the way, the Men in Black, later on. So you hear a lot of these guys in the 80s who are post him, right? They're basically saying that it switched over in like the mid to late 80s, where they went from having humans doing this type of work to these hybrids who are like half reptilian, half human, or robotics. Just because they had the technology at that point to do it. So, but yeah, Division 6 is what he was sort of doing, before it became Division 6. This discussion on what's called the white wall theorem, which basically says when you have a hostile species coming up to interface with you, for example, a Draco, for example, right? They want to basically flood you to the point that you can't handle it and you almost collapse, right?
Yeah, right.
So what happens is with this white wall theorem is you put up this white wall defense until they decide to back off. And you have to make them respect your position. And once you do, then you give them pieces of information through that white wall defense that they need, and that is it.
Setting boundaries.
Yeah, it's like setting boundaries, exactly. So they have none. The Draco have no boundaries.
Very intrusive.
Yeah, they're almost predatorial about their sonic abilities. So, and your granddad basically figured out, he was one of the first people to figure out how to do this, along with some others that they brought in. Clifford Stone would be a good example of the next generation, right? He was Army that was trained, and DIA that was trained after your granddad. So he would be an example of like what the next iteration would look like after him.
So that was Will Nutter's information that we received. The next source is a channel communication, and our grandfather actually requested that the channeler's identity not be revealed to protect her safety, because she feared that she might be targeted if she was considered to have access to highly classified information. If we were to talk about this information publicly, people might go back to her and try to get more information, or the government might do something. So, according to her, when she actually contacted our grandfather and the channel he came through, Daniel Salter was involved in secret government programs from their inception in the 1950s, and you'll see this is a little different from the other ones. He was recruited after passing rigorous mental testing. Only a very small group of people went through this process, like 5 or less. Initially presented with alien technology from crash crafts to determine how to apply it, and then transitioned into ET relations in the early 1950s. He was involved in brokering deals to exchange human test subjects for alien technology. There was a lot of pressure around figuring out how to use the ET technology. They were stuck and couldn't progress without the ET support. None of the test subjects were killed, but they were experimented on, and he feels guilty about that to this day. Apparently, yeah, like she goes into a lot of detail, but there was a big team of the military pressure to move things along and progress, and I guess they were willing to do what they had to do. As a result of the deal, the technology received included particle accelerators, energy generators, electromagnetic technology, and time travel technology, which he was able to experience 3 or 4 times, but he said it was not pleasant and it's really hard on your body. And there's a lot of regulation. When they started doing it, ET started to interfere and say, you know, there's rules around this, the things you can and cannot do. Eventually, he became the government's liaison with extraterrestrials so that he could directly interface with them to develop the technology, because his team was doing the back engineering and they had the middleman. It was very, it took a long time. So he became the direct interface. The communication started on military bases, and later the transition for him going up to ships to communicate. He continued these communications throughout his entire career. He helped establish ET communication protocols and was involved in the inception of the secret space program and super soldier programs, which they weren't called back then. He said he was not put through the programs when he was a child because they didn't exist then, but he was at the precipice of all of them and helped develop the programs and the trainings. He says there are clones and alters in the programs, and they are more present in current times than they were in his time. According to the channel, he was not cloned. They were very interested in having us in the programs because of our connection to him. However, he was protective of us, and after the initial testing of the programming, he put a stop to it because he saw negative impacts on our behaviors. It was on Derek from 4 to 10, and for me from age 4 to 14. He's disappointed in the way things are being run in the programs, does not agree with the current practices. He withheld tremendous amount of information from his book for his safety. 98% of his career was above top secret. He says full disclosure is eventually inevitable. And yeah.
I was going to wait before we get to this good stuff with Tony. I was going to say, my brother here, by the time he was 15, he was a big asshole. So like there was something going on with him, like for sure. Something was going on and he completely changed. By the way, he got hit by a train and survived, like, and he's completely fine, and he's never been the same after that. So I think it rewired something. The trauma helps, of course, I guess. Okay. But he's a good guy, yeah. Okay. This is interesting stuff. This is because of Tony's help. Thank you, Tony, and your team. This is very cool because we just got this information from his like upper echelon class of our memo viewers. And so I'm only going to go through a couple of them, but like you just did that course yesterday, this is what we got. This is the results. And Tony was like blown away, and he's like, this is crazy, but obviously there's something to this. So the first ideogram, I mean, after that, they're just drawing basically what it looks like a UFO. There's the storyboard here of another disc-like UFO, something about temperature and maybe getting colder as you go down, like down or something. The storyboard with the UFOs, people watching the UFOs, maybe going into a cavern or something, like a long tunnel hallway. And then again, a hall meeting room and tests, medical pain, agony, like a medical bed. It looks like not very pleasant. Then you get all the descriptions of what you see, the emotions, what you hear. So like blurry movement, bright eyes, overwhelmed, amazement, awe, sick, ominous, queasy. It's quiet place, large, massive object. It's UFO spacecraft, elite group questioning, target being taken and questioned and hurt, target saved and scared and interrogated, essential info needed, taken into the fold, liability. Okay, this was, again, just a number. This is a freaking number, right, Tony? Yeah, you want to come up here? Because this is crazy. I mean, he can explain it. It's like a double-blind type of deal, so.
Yeah, I just want to say that the target was, I believe the question was, you gave me 4 questions, and the first one was, how many times did he interact with ETs? And the number 7 kept coming up. But it was a 6-digit number that the team got. I think we had 6 viewers on this. 4 of them had ET drawings and came back, and the number 7 kept repeating. So, but they had no idea. The team had no idea. I think we were doing, the week before was like some monument. So they had absolutely no idea, and everybody came back with ET which is not typical for our targets. So, yeah. And one thing earlier, so actually one of the viewers is with me, Veronica, in the back, and when you were talking earlier about what he was saying, she said it was exactly what she viewed, that he was seen as a liability, but he was so valuable that they couldn't decide what to do with him. At a certain point, he was a liability to the program, and that was another reoccurring theme through the viewings.
Yes, thank you, Tony. That's awesome. So this really helps confirm a lot of stuff. I don't know how from a number you can just start pulling up stuff like this. It's crazy. This is the second one, another tunnel, long, very fast, deep into the earth. Colorado, NORAD, under mountains, some base, secret base, levels, like multi-level underground. Looks like probably Dulce or one of those bases, Area 51. People in front of a bunch of computers scanning, a lot of busy work, like mentally on the monitors and screens, and just a lot more about the, what they were seeing, possible vegetation, more something top or ground mundane, but underneath there's something else going on. More and more of that same kind of concept. Yeah, need a pass to get through, multi-levels, underground facility, dark area, green, high breathing pushed, much data being processed, many levels, quantum, fast, and interesting paradox. Area is normal pace, but this pace is fast, something like that. And then this was just another one, just the last one had the mountains and underground stuff, kind of similar situation. So some guy watching something, obviously. And so this is another person that we talked to. This is because thanks to Laura and Drago, who should maybe they're around. But yeah, so he got us introduced to Eliana Ka, Messages from a Star Travel. That's where you can find her, but she wanted to make sure, of course, I want to make sure she's recognized for this, but she was just given basically, I don't know our grandfather's name at the time, basically. I don't think she was given much more than that, but I had to ask the question in my mind, and I told Drago what the questions were, but she picked out this, and one of them has to do with particleization. So this is all something that came up, and she's obviously seeing some guy with a visor. It's almost like the looking glass stuff, maybe, like it has to do with time travel. You're like a precog, and you're seeing into the near future or not, and then there's like the supercomputer that's monitoring and seeing what possibilities of what's going to happen in the future. So for a form of particleization, time travel technology is used together with quantum entanglement. It opens up time dilation windows, allowing to view various events backwards in time as well as forwards in time, seeing the near future. And there is the collecting of the receiving viewing of the time travel data through a use of quantum computers, supercomputers to gather all processed information through the waveform frequency visor that the subject wears. However, a live element of precog with strong psionic ability is needed to focus on the time dilation stamps and events viewed for the near future to correctly and accurately receive which events are being seen, why, and what is happening with the data transmitted. Again, more about frequency coding, the field visor, time dilations, quantum entanglement. It's interesting.
Our grandfather did say his specialties were, UFO crashes, aliens, and particleization was the main one, dealing with time travel, which he alluded to in his book.
Yep. So this is like the final section. It's gonna hopefully kind of maybe tie in the particleization and this aspect, like kind of what is this all about? What does this mean? Where are we going? So I'll go quickly through this. This was one chapter mentioning Elizabeth Clare. She's very important because she was an astronomer from South Africa who met with an Akon, who was a space visitor from Alpha Proxima Centauri, one of the closest stars. They had communications for decades, and so the government found out, and they tried to down that craft. And in '94 is when it crashed. And but she had all this information. She wrote a whole book about the light technology, how it works. Light is an intelligent energy that can be thought into existence and substance. This all goes back to this particleization idea, you'll see. So all of creation is light, the key to the universe. Just a lot of technical terms to how the frequency rate affects, things, anti-gravity waves versus this and that, how the spaceship can move around by changing the frequency, the vibration. Using crystals, the technology they don't use, obviously, like throttles and wheels and conventional physics, like nuts and bolts. They use a computer, but through crystals and through the mind, the ship is able to move through your consciousness. That's how it gets around. These people have no governments, and they're the only group of wise beings known as the Ancient Ones. we all want, this is what my grandfather said, we all wind up kicking and screaming, or some of us willing, going through what Native Americans call the void. And we kind of touched on the void. I guess there's different interpretations of it, but it's like going to that other level outside of physical reality. So our grandfather was part Native American, and so he talked to a lot of elders, and they all explained the fifth dimension is the void, where life occurs instantaneously. What you think of becomes, then it becomes existence. So we're kind of finding that out now. They travel without ships or without materialized bodies. They can travel through particleization. That's the other part of it. More about Christ consciousness and all these quotes. The answer to the universe, to the unified field propulsion systems for interstellar spaceships, the equation of 7 harmonics is the key to space travel. Universal harmonics is the math of the Akon civilization. The resonance tuned to matter itself expressed in terms of light. We need to decide to enter cosmic consciousness, our grandfather said. That is truly what life with the cosmos clearance is all about, beyond the military, beyond the government, beyond ourselves, and into the fifth world. He briefly goes through the Philadelphia experiment. He says particleization is the principle behind time travel. All these things we kind of just were like, we didn't get it at first, but we're putting it all together. He mentioned again this mind-wiping technology and stuff that the NSA was doing. Again, you can use it for good or bad, and this was obviously for not so good things, like the voice of God technology is basically what it's describing. Satellites can get within a millimeter wave technology to get inside not only your house, but inside your mind. This is called DNA scripting, so he describes all of that. So this is important, kind of more on a lighter note. Our cells contain the encoded history within our DNA. And then everything is within our DNA. We're fractals, holographs of creation of the universe. So it is possible to think something into existence, to actually form your own reality through it. We can do that because of our pineal gland. That's the main reason. That's why the ETs are kind of many of them don't have a pineal gland. That's why we're special. That's why we're so interesting to them. Supposedly that's why they're here. That's what my grandfather, he was trying to explain that too. You need not search for a wise teacher. You are that teacher. As long as we think we are only a body, we are subject to death. When we realize we are not a body, that the real self is a waveform, we have no limitations. That's what parallelization is all about. In a waveform, you can go into another dimension, another solar system or galaxy. In that state, you are the one with the universal mind and the universal computer. We have always had beings with us, the Turianites, Zeta Reticulan Sirians, for thousands and thousands of years. He said, how will we all adjust to this? Will it be by osmosis? Will someday 40% of other people wake up and say, I know this, I have that heritage within my DNA, within my genes. And suddenly everybody will realize the truth. Hopefully that's kind of what's happening. If we think that a place, this is one of the last slides, if we think that a place such as Venus is inhabitable, there's the other higher dimensions with non-physical realities and hierarchies of vibrations of light, levels unfamiliar to us. These vibrations observed in the light spectrum, ultraviolet to infrared, with other color frequencies between. There are invisible realities where ET contact may be made. Many Earth cultures have based religions on that and the reports of angels, invisible realities. The knowledge of the universe is multidimensional, more than we can comprehend to present. We call this the harmonics of light, spectrums of many realities, science of light technology through which the extraterrestrials move. We're now approaching merging of these worlds with our own reality. And the Hopis say that we have entered another world, another consciousness, the fifth world. They say that the entire world will receive purification. The only people of the way of peace will survive to usher in the new age of the sixth world. So just one more little clip here. And this is a really good saying. We can read that after the...
There's a lot of other things happening if you've done it, but they don't tell you. That they're going to have to reveal to you pretty soon, because they've lost control over the nations that they did control through petroleum. One nation is China. One thing your government fears more than anything else is to march 6 billion people in any direction. We learned that in Korea. The Chinese did not ride the Korean trucks. They marched. Just like in World War II. They moved their factories and machinery and everything to the mountains to get away from the Japanese, put them all back together and successfully sustained themselves throughout the war. So what force do we have with air against China. None. So that's the reason our government fears China more than they fear any other government. China don't listen to us. We learned how to do that in Korea. We learned from the Chinese. They brainwashed. It's very simple now. You don't have to do anything. You go get shot. We get more shots than any country in the world. All you have to do is have the right thing put in by any doctor, especially in the military. You got to go all the time. Oh, we're going to get a tetanus shot. Well, maybe it's not a tetanus shot. Then maybe you go to your civilian doctor. Well, I'm depressed. I need a shot. Well, maybe you get what you think you're getting, and maybe you don't. In the future, you probably won't get what you think you're getting. Now, I want you to ask what I've told you so far. Is it going to make any difference in your life or more? Now, Harold, Paul, Pat, they could tell you things about your government. You better wake up, better change, get interested in changing your life.
So we thought that was interesting. He talking about the threat of China in the future, and then getting shots. You might not know what you're actually getting. And then, his main message is, though, we need to wake up. And he says, it's only through public demand that the veil of secrecy can be lifted. The entire subject of UFOs should be open to a thorough study with public involvement. The Black Project should be viewed as an identifiable misuse of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, of we the people and by the people. It's not a time to be fearful, but a time to be bold. And one of the things our grandfather included in the book was this Hopi prophecy. He says, you have been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell people that this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in the right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It's time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for the leader. This could be a good time. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on for the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart, and they will suffer greatly. Know the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above water. See who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Thank you, guys. Oh, yeah, and there are books on sale if you're interested for $25. We are not associated with the book whatsoever, so we're not making any money. We just want to spread the word, so.